All right, my blood brothers from across the pond, Laurence Woollard and Clive Smith, are back to tell us about what's going on with the UK blood inquiry. They join us now.
Listeners, I am here with friends of the podcast, Laurence Woollard and Clive Smith. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. I feel lucky that I get to talk to you instead of Patrick.
I was hoping to ask Patrick if he'd had any more bath bleeds, so I'm disappointed. Lovely to see you, Amy, but
I know.
I think he's avoiding us.
I think so too. No. Never. We'll have to text him about bath bleeds because I don't know the answer to that either. But this conversation actually started a little bit, I think, from a conversation Patrick and I had a few podcasts ago about the tainted blood crisis in both of our countries. Y'all, of course, from the UK, and how we don't talk about this enough. And Clive, I just kind of wanted to throw it over to you to give listeners a bit of a synopsis of what this has been like in the UK. It's very different than what has happened over here in the States. And really, I'm playing a little bit of an ignorant card as well. Like, I would love to know a little bit more about the history and where you guys are at. So I'll throw it over to you. Good, sir.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, you're absolutely right. When you mentioned this in the podcast, it was something that really resonated with me. And Laurence and I talked about this recently, that I still remember going to WFH in 2018 in Glasgow. And I think I had one person talk about HIV or hepatitis or a relative that had died. And that was one conversation over the course of many days. And I thought, we just don't talk about this enough in our community. And for so many people, I think particularly HIV, but hepatitis C too, that the stigma that still exists even today is absolutely huge. So thank you for having both of us on, because it's such a welcome opportunity to talk about this within our community and hopefully share some learnings for everybody too. And you're right in the sense that what happened in the US was different, but it's so similar too. There are differences and similarities. And I guess we have to rewind really to 2017 when the public inquiry, the infected blood inquiry here in the UK was announced. It was announced by the then Prime Minister Theresa May, and I think many people will wonder, well, why? Well, A, why did it take so long? And B, how did it finally come about all those years later? It was, as ever, it's a number of things. And I have to say, obviously, I speak as someone with severe haemophilia A and as the chair of the Haemophilia Society here in the UK, but no one person was responsible for this. There are so many people who have campaigned and worked so hard over the years. I think it was JFK, wasn't it, who said that success has many parents whilst failure is an orphan. And that's so true of this, that we're here now because of so many people, and so many people who are sadly no longer with us as well. So in 2017, there were three really big things. Firstly, the political situation in the UK. The Prime Minister at the time, the party that was in government, needed the support of another small political party, and small but very significant political party in Northern Ireland. They entered into what was known as a confidence and supply arrangement. And one of their riders, apparently, to entering into power with them was that they wanted the Prime Minister to announce a public inquiry. There had also been a letter by all the leaders of all the major opposition parties, a joint letter saying, we all agree, we all support this, so we think you should do it. The second thing that happened at the time, there was a politician by the name of Andy Burnham who stepped down as a member of Parliament so he could run to be the mayor of Greater Manchester. You can't do both jobs at the same time. In Manchester, at least, you can in some other areas of the country. And he used what was known as his valedictory speech in Parliament. So the last speech he ever made in Parliament before stepping down, he used that to raise the scandal. And he talked about having evidence of a criminal cover-up on an industrial scale. And he said to government, he said, if you don't launch a public inquiry, he said, I will go to the police with this evidence. So he was really trying to force the government's hand on that. The third thing that was happening was there was a group litigation order. Back in 1989, when people were infected, specifically with HIV, there was a court case against the government. The case settled out of court for many reasons, primarily because people were ill and dying and they were desperate for the money. And many people, everyone had to agree to settle and take an out-of-court payment. in addition to that, they also had to sign a waiver, what's been referred to now as the waiver, which meant that you couldn't take action against the government in relation to any other bloodborne viruses. And of course, this was at a time when we didn't know about hepatitis C. There was no test available for it. And some people have talked about this as one of the greatest strokes that government ever played on our community, was to do that, to say, right, we know you've got hepatitis C, we know you're probably going to want to sue us in the future, sign here so you can't do it. And so there was a legal case going on here in England, specifically England and Wales, in relation to challenging that waiver, whether that was lawful, to sign away your rights to something you never knew you had in the first place. So it was a coalescence, really, of those three things that came together, and eventually the Prime Minister announced this public inquiry. And it really was, it happened very quickly, and to the extent that she told her cabinet, she told all the other senior government ministers on the Tuesday morning, and it was announced at 1 o'clock on the 1 o'clock news here in the UK, and we as the Haemophilia Society found out about it at 12 o'clock. Quite often you'd have embargoed access, this kind of thing, for a week or so, or maybe a few days, so you can get your house in order and do things. That never happened. So this happened really quickly. The society and first call for a public inquiry in 1989, and many other people have kept up the campaign too, other campaign groups too. So for it to happen almost overnight it was just incredible. We actually happened to have a board meeting on the Wednesday in London, and I remember catching the train from where I live in Yorkshire and getting the big local newspaper, the Yorkshire Post, and we were front page news. And it felt, it was so momentous to finally see that this was on the front page. It was grabbing the headlines. It was getting attention. It was the culmination of so much. But we knew that it was the end of the beginning, in the sense that we knew the next phase was coming in terms of the inquiry.
That is fascinating. And when was that?
That was 2017, July 2017.
2017.
Yeah.
That is incredible. Laurence, what were your memories of that time? In particular, like 2017, where were you? What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, so firstly, again, thank you for obviously having me and to join Clive here. And I think without embarrassing Clive, I think I want to acknowledge that his role as chair of the Haemophilia Society, but also the Haemophilia Society as an organisation, the leadership that they've given on this issue has been remarkable. And to Clive's point, there's a lot of individual campaigners and groups, that have worked tirelessly to get, the inquiry and where we are today. So I want to acknowledge that, and also as somebody from a family that was affected, losing my grandparents as a consequence of contaminated blood. I think it's fascinating, as Clive points out, that policy window and how that opened up at the time because of those different streams that Clive's alluded to. I think, to be honest, just complete disbelief. My relationship with my mum was already very strong, but actually to kind of go on this journey with her, and particularly around, writing the personal statement for the inquiry, over an 11,000 word statement, and really delving in and opening up with some of those scars. And it's been really painful process, but also a really sort of healing one at the same time, and actually truly understanding, for my mum, what her parents, what my grandparents actually went through, and what they had suffered, and then obviously what we've heard, throughout the inquiry. It's been, it's been a real, it's been a real experience, to be honest. And obviously we're now looking, to the report being published in May.
Clive, for those of us Americans listening on the show, tell me a little bit about this process. What has it been like? What, has there been resistance to this inquiry? What has the past few years been like in terms of process?
I think Laurence made a really good point there in terms of everybody. The inquiry was the Holy Grail. And when we got it, everyone thought, well, that's it. Everything's going to be resolved. We're going to get this sorted now. But I remember speaking about this on the news quite early on when I was asked a similar question, what's it been like initially? And it's been relief that people have finally been able to talk about it. It's been... vindication that actually so much of what people have been telling government and everyone else for years, they said this is true. There's a journalist here in the UK called Caroline Wheeler. She's the political editor of one of our major newspapers here, the Sunday Times. And she tells a story about being, a really junior reporter, being sat there on the news desk and somebody ringing her up, and she just thought this guy was a complete crackpot. And she went away and she, what we'd refer to in modern day parlance as fact-checked everything he told her. And she said her jaw pretty much just dropped and said, I couldn't believe it. Everything he was telling me was true. And it was just the most bizarre, tall story I'd ever heard. And every single word of it was true. And so I think so many people have felt vindicated by the evidence that's come out. In terms of the process, it's taken longer than we anticipated, partly because of COVID. Obviously, that interrupts it in the middle. Partly, I think the inquiry took a little bit longer to get set up than might have normally happened, because there was another public inquiry here in the UK. There was a huge fire in West London called Grenfell where 71 people died, and that happened very shortly before. And so that inquiry being set up, I think, possibly caused a little bit of delay in the administration here. But once it got going, and Laurence and I were talking about this recently, that the chair of the inquiry is a gentleman by the name of Sir Brian Langstaff, who's a retired High Court judge. Him and his team, because he'd want us to acknowledge everybody, the humanity that they've shown the community has been incredible, because, and it's been in contrast to the way the government's treated everyone for decades. It really has. And that's, I think, what's the most striking about it. And every day you'd go, people would get there early in the morning, they would have coffee and a biscuit. And I've said to Laurence, it's so much more than tea and biscuits or coffee and cake, whatever you want to call it. But it's because people have been there, and we have to acknowledge as well, this isn't just about haemophilia, because the inquiry has been about people who were infected here from whole blood transfusions too. Many women, sadly, were given blood during childbirth, for example. So many people have not spoken about it, and they've gone there, and for the first time they've been able to sit in a room and talk to somebody who knows their background and knows their story without them having to tell them. And that has been really, really powerful, just to have their voice heard and be acknowledged. And it's like you can see people walk out and their shoulders just look that bit lighter. And there have been lots of themes that have come out of this inquiry, and I'm sure these are where the similarities really come out in the US, in Canada, in Ireland. And I should say that people like David Page in Canada and Brian O'Mahony in Ireland have been fantastic confidants and support through all of this. I've always been able to pick up the phone to them or drop them an email or have a chat to them at a conference somewhere, and the benefit of their experience has been really huge for us. So I should acknowledge both of them in all of this as well. But the common themes, the testing for people with HIV without them knowing, and then finding out that they had HIV and not telling them, and then them going on to infect their partners and then their partners dying. The manner in which people's diagnosis was communicated, in a corridor or shouted across a car park, or the matter-of-fact way in which people were told you've got HIV and you've probably only got a couple of years to live, or people being told to terminate their pregnancies, that they shouldn't be having children, that stories of people having friends visit and then when they or going to visit people, and when they left they would then burn the bed sheets. Those kinds of things, that the stigma that's come out. And even during the currents of the inquiry, one person gave evidence and said that she had a tenancy cancelled on her flat because there was a legal letter that came through from her solicitors, from her lawyers, and it was about her father who died from contaminated blood, and her landlord just said, I don't want you living in this property, and kicked her out. And this was within a handful of years ago, not even that. And so the stigma that's still here, because one of the things that happened here in the UK, there was a huge campaign, and viewers can go on YouTube, and if you put in AIDS Tombstone campaign, you can watch the advert. And it was chilling, the voice on it, the tombstones. It was a public health campaign fundamentally, and it was told, and the slogan was "Don't die of ignorance," and it was warning people about HIV, the fact if you caught it and you got AIDS, then you would die, all those sorts of things. And there was a leaflet delivered to every home in the country, in the UK. And that didn't even happen, I don't think, Laurence, during COVID, did it? I mean, there were leaflets and things, but in terms of a concerted campaign, that campaign back in the 80s, and the shadow that has cast over the community is so long. It really is. And now we're at a stage where, of course, treatment for HIV is so good that people are undetectable viral load. You can have children through unprotected sex, all those sorts of things. But the government have never done anything to rebalance that narrative that people know about. There's a TV program over here called EastEnders, which has done a fantastic job of doing that, actually, through one of its characters talking about his infection. And they were brilliant, actually. In the 80s, they had another character who was infected with HIV, and they were really, really good at communicating what it actually looked like in real life. So all those themes that we've had throughout, but I think we have been able to make some progress during the currency of the inquiry. So, as you know, with the United Kingdom, we are 4 countries effectively, and we have devolved governments. So this was actually the 3rd inquiry we've had here in the UK. So there was another inquiry in 2008. It was an independent inquiry. So it wasn't what we call a statutory inquiry. So it didn't have any power to compel witnesses to attend, to demand evidence be produced to, etc. So it worked on people's goodwill. And that was a helpful inquiry, but didn't really come out with any major conclusions or recommendations, and of course didn't have the force of a full statutory inquiry behind it. There was then another inquiry in Scotland, the Penrose inquiry, which happened after power was devolved to Scotland. Now, of course, lots of this happened when Westminster in London was at the heart of this, so it couldn't really compel the production of the really important documents. So that was helpful to an extent in Scotland, because they had then a full clinical review about support for people with HIV and hepatitis, and the support payments that were paid annually to people then got increased. But then what happened, when the inquiry first kicked off, one of the things that the chair heard loud and clear from everybody was the fact that depending which country you're infected, you're receiving different levels of support payments. It's like being in the US, and depending which state you're infected in, you would get more if you lived in one than you did in another. And everyone's saying, well, hang on, we're all the same. Why is this not equal? And he had this really powerful line. He talks about the grinding hardship that was causing to everybody. So many people who've given up their lives, women particularly, have given up their careers to look after their children, their loved ones, all those people, and have never had acknowledgement or recompense for that. So the day the inquiry first sat hearing evidence, we had a huge uplift in payments of, I think, something like £76 million. And the government announced it on the day, which was welcome and frustrating. Obviously, they did it to try and steal the headlines away from the bad news that was going to be coming their way on the day when people were giving evidence. But that was very helpful. And the other significant thing we managed to do is we managed to have a compensation study. And the chair of that study recommended, he made 19 recommendations. In fact, interim compensation has been paid to everyone who was infected of £100,000 already. But the chair of the current public inquiry, as Laurence alluded to, it's going to report in May of this year, on the 21st of May. He's recommended that the government get on with setting up a compensation body already. He said, people are still dying. People are still dying at the rate of 1 every 4 days here in the UK. We know that from figures. And he's saying, people don't have the luxury of time. They want to go to their graves knowing that their families will be looked after financially. And he told the government that they should get on and set up this scheme by the end of last year. And the government have still done nothing about it. And so a couple of weeks ago, we had a lobby in Parliament. In fact, 2 weeks tomorrow, we had a lobby in Parliament, meeting our members of Parliament, trying to raise this, get this up the agenda. We've also got an amendment in a bill before Parliament at the moment, something known as the Victims and Prisoners Bill. It's in front of the other house. So we have the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So like you have the Senate and the House of Representatives, and it's in front of the reviewing chamber, as it were, the House of Lords. And as soon as that becomes an act of Parliament, the clock starts ticking for government to do this. And it was really significant. So I was actually in London, and I was in Parliament on the Monday night back in December when they had the vote on this amendment. And the government lost by 4 votes. So it was a very narrow vote. But the 10 different parties voted for this amendment. So you can see how much cross-party support this has. And it was a huge historic moment, because it was the first time the government had lost a vote in Parliament since 2019. So, it was all over the newspapers the next day. It was a really big moment. So we keep going, we keep trying, we keep being frustrated in the delay. Like you, we're going to have an election this year. You've got your election in November. We've got an election, which means politically the dynamic is challenging, because we have to try and ride 2 horses in the same race, because the current government, and we suspect strongly that there will be a change of government at some point this year. So that really spreads us a little bit more thinly than we like to be as well.
Yeah.
Clive and Laurence, this is the next question is out of sheer ignorance, but explain a little bit the difference between the States and the UK in terms of manufacturers' responsibility in the blood contamination crisis, and I think the communication, obviously, failures that happened. You are focused on the government, and tell me a little bit about the differences there.
Laurence, do you want to answer that, or shall I give it a go?
Yeah, Clive. I think Clive, obviously.
I'm just thinking everyone's bored of hearing my voice at this stage. So.
I honestly could listen to Clive on this subject. He's so eloquent and like heartfelt about this subject for hours. I think if I may, before Clive answers that, if I may, Amy, there's just a few points, and then I'll let Clive riff, because I think your question's like vitally important. I was just going to say, one, that to Clive's point, the dignity and respect shown by the inquiry team has been remarkable. I think, two, the generational impact of this scandal, and I think being at the inquiry and seeing the ages of different people and their families, I think really hits home. I think, three, something Clive mentioned again, which is about this idea that what happened was quote unquote bad luck, and how that had been socialized within Westminster and within different governments over the decades. I find that, I think it's how that happened, how that actually occurred, I think is something we'll look back on, as I think as a learning, one of the many learnings from this inquiry. I also just wanted to mention that I think, again, as a family, we were really privileged to be able to hear evidence from my grandfather's physician, because he was still alive. And actually, he treated my two older brothers and I as well during our pediatric care. And so I think, for many people, because of 30, 40 years being too late, for them, they weren't actually able to hear, I think the saying is from the horse's mouth, from those physicians that had treated their family members or themselves, if obviously they've survived. So I think for us, again, there was a level of privilege there, understanding, what it may have been like for my granddad, and obviously for my grandmother. And also just to say, I think that even kind of sort of post actually, what was going on with treatment at the time. And I think Clive had mentioned about the waiver that the likes of my nan was forced to sign in the early 90s, the schemes that were set up to provide some financial assistance for those infected and their partners on the scheme. The government and those arm's length organisations, they had a duty of care to look after the most vulnerable, and they completely failed to do that. And the likes of my nan didn't have that level of provision, whereby she was obviously living with, the health consequences of being an infected partner, given that my grandfather sadly died in 1987, but my grandmother survived till 2003, that, she had to, she was still having to part-time work even to her sort of pension age. She died at 73. She was having to let out a room to have a lodger just to be able to kind of pay for living. All of those things, as with many that have been impacted by this scandal, they didn't deserve that, and they didn't deserve the treatment post, the actual sort of the time of what was going on with the actual product use. So I think, so thanks for letting me share those. And I think, I'll pass over to Clive, to maybe just explore a little bit more in detail, as you said, around what was known or not known, I guess, at the time in terms of what was happening with product.
Yeah, I think we can largely split it to England and Wales and then Scotland and Northern Ireland. So I think that the majority of infection that took place in England and Wales, not all, but the majority, was as a result of imported product. And sadly, of course, that was imported from the US. When it came to Scotland, though, they've always had a very strong medical profession and tradition there. They've had what we call royal colleges there who issue guidance and support for healthcare professionals. And so they always had their own sort of fractionation centres. And so nearly all of their infection was kind of homegrown, as it were, from domestic donors. And of course, there's a difference, isn't it? And some of that was then used in Northern Ireland too. But of course, the huge difference between the US and the UK, of course, is the altruistic system we have for blood donations here rather than payments. Payments for blood has never been allowed here for many, many years. And I think that fundamentally changed the landscape. And I think to Lawrence's point, the infections and the viruses were one thing, but when you sit there and listen to the evidence day after day after day, you just feel that every level of protection that was there to protect patients failed. The layers of failure, the sourcing blood from people on Skid Row, prostitutes, drug addicts, prisoners, etc., and then pooling it, and then prescribing it, and then failing to respond to people's infections, and then causing them to fight and campaign for 40 years to get a public inquiry. In all of this, you just think, where is the humanity in any of this? I think we as the society describe this in our opening as a humanitarian disaster which required a humanitarian response. And you've just never seen that. You really haven't. And to Lawrence's point, Lawrence used the phrase, he talked about incredibly bad luck. And Lawrence is using that because one of the former prime ministers here in the UK, Sir John Major, when he gave evidence, some people might not like me saying this, but I actually thought, generally speaking, I thought he was a very good witness, and I thought he didn't really put a foot wrong. But one comment he made, I think towards the end of the morning in his evidence, was he talked about the fact that people with haemophilia being infected with these viruses was incredibly bad luck. And I think if you take a step back, I think I can appreciate what he was trying to say, but he said it in an incredibly ham-fisted way, in the sense that, people with diabetes or epilepsy were never going to be at risk of infection through HIV and hepatitis. It was always going to be people with haemophilia who were at risk because of blood products as a result of these viruses. So when he described it as being incredibly bad luck, there were audible gasps in the room. I was there when he gave evidence. Everyone just went, "Oh, sorry, what?" And he tried to correct it later on in his evidence, and sadly, I think probably compounded it. And there are many people who would probably spit if they ever heard his name mentioned. So that was really hard. You imagine being an American and a former president stands in a room and says, "What happened to you was just incredibly bad luck." Everyone's sitting there going, "No, it damn well wasn't. No, it really wasn't."
That's incredible. You mentioned that there will be a report coming out in May.
Yeah.
What are the next steps? What's the future look like? Again, for us ignorant Americans that don't understand.
Not at all. And this is something that I've been aware of for some time. So one of the really big takeaways that I got from David and Brian when speaking to them about their inquiries is they always said to us, look, there are two phases to this. First of all, you need a good inquiry. Secondly, you need a good government response. And so, we're coming to the end of the inquiry, and I hope more than half of the work has been done, but I don't think more than half of the job has been done, because the job now is to get a good response from government, obviously financially in terms of compensation, but there are so many other things as well. Some people would like a memorial, some people, so we had last year for the first time, we had a doctor appointed as what's known as a patient safety commissioner here in England as a result of another scandal in relation to other products that are used in healthcare here. And we all feel that if we had our inquiry 20 years ago, we might have had a patient safety commissioner and people might have been prevented from harm. And, in all scandals, whatever goes wrong, be it 9/11, be it this, be it many other disasters around the world, everybody's united, I think, by the one desire that they never want it to happen to anybody again. Even your worst enemy, you wouldn't wish this on, because it was so traumatic and so horrific. And so I think it's about learning lessons. I think it's about changing culture within the healthcare system too. And I think that's a really important piece to talk about right now, particularly with things like gene therapy, things like informed consent. And I talk about informed consent at the moment, particularly around gene therapy, that it's not a static decision, that people need to know about other treatments coming down the line. They need to know about other options. Is this right? This might be right for me today, but is it right for me tomorrow? And so that relationship, I think, with healthcare professionals, that paternalistic attitude has got to change. And I think we have more of a challenge here in the UK. I think this is a difference actually between the US and the UK, because in the US, you obviously sadly have to pay for your healthcare. And I always describe it as like going into a restaurant. If you go into a restaurant and have bad service, you complain or you don't go back. You might do both. In the UK, because it's funded through taxes, everybody's just really grateful for whatever they get. And not only that, but it's a challenge having a lifelong condition. You don't want to upset your nurse, you don't want to upset your doctor or the receptionist or whoever else it is, because you've got to go back and see them again potentially. Sometimes it will get to a situation where your relationship just breaks down so much you might end up moving to another doctor or to another centre, whatever it is. But I think that's a real challenge within the UK health system and within haemophilia and other bleeding disorders where you've got a lifelong condition. I think we're more reluctant to challenge at times and push back and ask questions for fear of rocking the boat. And I think that's something we need to talk about a little bit more at times.
And just that inertia, isn't it, that you're speaking to, Clive? But also I think as well, Amy, whilst it's kind of very obviously kind of a reflective practice, the inquiry, I guess there's also this kind of forward-looking element about actually, in terms of kind of redressing those historical wrongdoings, not only on sort of an individual and family level, but actually at a system level about, investment into inherited bleeding disorders care. We know that there are, as much as the US, we know that there's disparities in clinical provision across the UK. And I think, again, it's about sort of equity and about, how do we ensure that, everybody has equity of access to the relevant services to live as fulfilling a life as possible. And I think, I don't know whether Clive wants to comment and if we have time, but I know that there's a national psychological service that's, I think, potential being implemented, but
Yeah, I mean, we carried out that peer review, didn't we, in the UK, launched back in 2019. It showed that 2/3 of centres in the UK have inadequate physio and 2/3 of centres have inadequate psychological support. And, at a time when the community is going through an infected blood inquiry, a public inquiry, to not have sufficient psychological support is appalling. The situation's been slightly better in Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales, but the government are only now really implementing a proper psychological support service for those infected and affected by contaminated blood, because it's really important that we don't forget about the families who are left behind who don't have a connection with a haemophilia centre. So those with haemophilia can walk into a centre and hopefully get some support. But for those who lost their loved ones and don't have any connection with their centres anymore, and some of them don't want to go into the centres. I spoke to a doctor recently, I won't say who it was, but they said to me, we sometimes think of the hospital as just the building. And she said it's not. She said it's so much more. And for people who were infected in these places to have to keep coming back and be reminded of that is really harrowing. And so there's a danger that people don't go and get the psychological support. They don't go and get the physical support they need. If they're having a bleed or a problem, they don't want to go and see the physio, because actually just going to that place is really triggering and traumatic for them. And this goes to the generational harm piece that Laurence talks about, which, whilst this happened in the 70s and 80s, I've said already, it's cast a really long shadow over our community, which is why, coming back to where we started, it's great that we're talking about this a little bit more, because that can only help everybody, I think.
Hear, hear. Thank you so much to the both of you for coming on and sharing. I really appreciate it, and we'll have you on more. I'd love to have you back on when the report is published and kind of get your thoughts on the government's reaction and all the things. But hear, and hats off to both of you for the work that you've done, and to your communities for coming out and sharing their stories. That is a very courageous thing to do and an important thing to do, and we're all moved by it over here.
Thank you, Clive, Laurence, Mason, and Melody. And thank you to all who helped put together this episode of the BloodStream podcast, which of course would not be possible without our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Visit bleedingdisorders.com for more, and thanks as well to CSL Behring for their support of the gene therapy segment.